So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've worked on and go from there. Let's do it.
Sure. Sure. Well, thanks, Chris, for this
Of course.
opportunity. I have spent my career working in emerging markets, and so started in South Asia working on clean energy startups, and then moved to East Africa working with other clean energy startups. So I
Nice.
found the opportunity of clean energy really compelling because uh, vast majorities of these populations don't have access to any electricity, yet demand is very high for it. So it's like a very
Hmm.
clear, product that's needed. And so I got very interested in working in off-grid solar and some of these technologies to power homes that do not have electricity and addressing some of the market failures behind that. So I spent a few years there and then came back to the US. I worked at the United Nations Foundation on the same issue. And then I joined Facebook working on energy access for connectivity for a couple of years. And then I decided to start my own, get into entrepreneurship myself. And then I launched an organization to address this as well. So that's a bit about my background and some of the work I've done.
Hmm. Well, so did you find any particular challenges working in Africa that you thought were noteworthy?
Yes, definitely. So I think there's a lot of excitement right now for technology and fintech in Africa. It's the number one area investors are investing in Africa is fintech. However, I still think the market is a little immature
Mhm.
for some of these technologies. Mobile money, which is sending money through your phone, SMS versus like a Venmo, is extremely popular,
Mhm.
but it's become a very regulated market. So even though there's a lot of users, the governments have tried to reap some benefits and put pretty high taxes on it, which has
Right.
completely plummeted usage. Yet still startups have seen like, wow, so many people use it, so I can create a product and lots of people use it. And so a lot of people are trying and unfortunately failing, including myself, at looking at that
Learning
opportunity.
experience. It's a
Yeah,
learning experience.
it's a learning process. So I think that's the uh, the big challenge is it's a huge market for sure. I mean, you have over 1 billion people on the continent, mostly young, who
Mhm.
are acquiring smartphones at like exponential rates, but using apps and software for productivity, for finances. This is still going to take time.
Right, right. So all the stuff we hear from a financial perspective, because I have financial services customers, and they're all saying, Kenya is the place to look, right? This is where things are like really moved along, and I'm assuming it's very different in every country, right? So, do you find that there's some areas where where they're ahead of us, as opposed to, I mean, because I think in some areas they are ahead of us because in some areas there's less regulation, there's more of a green field, but I guess, did you find that?
So Kenya was definitely that's the market we worked into, and that
Hmm.
was kind of the one that all the startups were working in. So the
Right.
nice thing about users is a lot of them have been bombarded by similar offerings, so they are not like new, like what is this? Like they're like, oh, okay, this is another similar solution to this other one I saw yesterday. So
Right.
the users are more comfortable with it. So there is more of an opportunity, but then you also have more competition. So
Mm.
um, so that's the challenge. The um, the question about opportunities in leapfrogging. So what I think has been really fantastic about the Kenyan market and also East Africa in general is um, offering uh, asset-based financing in very small pieces. So people don't have credit scores. They ways to don't have collateral, so they don't have ways to purchase like a solar home system or a refrigerator or any kind of big item. Forget about a house, and pay in installments. So a lot of tech companies came in saying, we can look at other ways with technology to come up with a credit score so that people can pay in installments over time. And you've seen a lot of this type of like fintech in this sense, and that
Hmm.
has been, I think, more powerful for more poor consumers than poor consumers in the US who are pretty much traditionally completely locked out of
Right.
any kind of, financial opportunities.
Right. Right. So like a social credit score, right? Is that what we're
Exactly.
and but how well has that worked? I mean, I know sort of if you think about a social credit score, you think about, okay, here's all the things that people do, which, can increase a social credit score, and they have nothing to do with financial things. So, I mean, was it difficult to get people to sort of look at a social credit score and go, yes, that's actually valuable enough for us to lend against? Or, I mean, is that an issue?
Yeah. So one of the things about in these markets is people are incredibly tight with their communities, and so lenders are unwilling. One way they're able to reduce their risk is by knowing, okay, who this person has, grandparents, parents, sisters, brothers, aunts, uncles,
Yeah.
and I will never worry about like where that person has fled to because everybody knows this person in this community.
Mhm.
And that, I think, that social network there, and some fintech companies have leveraged that to build kind of a relationship profile, because the theory is the stronger your relationships are with people in your community, the less likely you are to default. So it's like the loners that you have to watch out
Mhm.
for.
Mhm.
so 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 that model has uh, um, lend itself to some of the more bigger fintech companies that are in East Africa who are pretty much focusing on that social credit score and making digital loans. Um, but I am a bit of a, a naysayer when it comes to digital loans because I still find them quite predatory. Because
Mhm.
that credit risk profile, I mean, yes, this person could repay a loan, and because they have a family network, you're feeling less concerned about it. But the monthly interest rates on these loans are like 25%. So,
Yikes. Oh.
yeah,
Are they, are they
exactly.
are they like that because that's basically what the market will bear, or are they just trying to be predatory? Like if
I
somebody
think,
came in with a 12% interest rate, would people just like flock to it, or people would like, I don't trust that?
oh, if someone over 12% interest rate, people would flock to it, 100%.
Okay.
That would be considered incredibly cheap in Kenya and
Right.
Uganda and these other countries. But the problem is um, the number of defaults make it really hard for lenders to make money off of interest. So they
Right.
have to charge really high to make money off of the ones who are paying back. But
Right.
is it fair loan? In my opinion, no, because
Mm.
it's such an expensive loan that only truly desperate people are going to take that. Like someone
Right.
whose shop has burned down and have to take that loan as like the only way to like survive, or like those types of people. Because the vast majority of people I spoke to about loan products through the fintech we were developing were not interested. They were like, loans are really expensive. Like we're more interested in inventory financing because
Mhm.
our suppliers are giving us stock at our shops, and it's more about paying back the money for the stock versus like my entire business and like understanding the entire business. And so that was really interesting to me too. And another insight I had was people are actually really don't like people probing into their financial information.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
like it was scary for
Like
me
here.
when I bought a house. Like, yeah, for me to get, when I bought a house to give my mortgage lender like literally every single information about how much I owned was scary. It was weird. Like that's the first person in my life who other than like my partner and I, who like knew how much money we had. It was really creepy. So that is also really disliked in this culture. Like people
Mhm.
don't want to open up and share how much money their businesses are making. And so which I thought was very interesting because that was not what I had thought before I
Yeah.
entered the
So
market. So
the trust is inside the community and the family. It's not in the vendor relationship, right? So
no, there's no trust there actually.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a huge problem.
Well, if you think about it, that's really interesting because we're kind of going back to like the original reason, the original way we trusted people. I mean, how did we trust people prior to all of this? It's like we know you, we know where you live, we know your family, we know you're a good, over time you borrowed from us, and we know you've paid back on time. So you kind of build up this real trust, face-to-face person trust, which of course we can't do over the internet. But yeah, I mean, it seems that to me that there's a way to sort of digitize this concept and turn it into something that's more useful, right? Because I mean, we all transact on the internet day in, day out. We do social transactions, we do monetary transactions, we do all this stuff. So it's almost like we could come up with some kind of a trust score for people and say, okay, this person is trustworthy, this one person is less trustworthy, whatever. Almost like an aggregate, like it's like, you know, eBay has kind of like that kind of score, right? And if we could just take that and aggregate all these other scores and say, okay, can't we just come up with a score per individual and say this person is trustworthy, this person is less trustworthy, whatever, and then land on that sort of thing? I mean, is that the kind of thing that they were thinking of, or in addition to
So
that?
a lot of fintech lenders, the digital lenders, are having to create their own scores and lend internally,
Mhm.
because a lot of companies have tried to sell these scores to banks, and banks, they're not so different from banks here, are not tech savvy. They're not. They're very, very, very risk averse,
Right,
and they might be interested. They'll enter conversations. Some might even do partnerships, but when it comes to like actual being customers and like buying these types of technologies to use in their own day to day, it's incredibly hard. So I
right.
found that myself when we were trying to sell our product to banks, but I also found that through some of other fintech companies who had that early day story of where they pivoted because they tried to get banks to use their product. It totally failed, and then they pivoted to basically become a competitor to a bank.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so that's basically what I've seen, and I think a lot of people are trying to get banks and technology providers to work more closely together. Like a lot of governments and donor agencies, they see this opportunity, the UN, and so they're like trying to bring them together. But I haven't seen any successful examples of where a bank took on a fintech partner to change the way they operate in making loans. I've
Mhm.
seen that only in core banking solutions where they digitized their core banking, but not in terms of changing the methodologies.
Right, right. So do you see? So what do you think about banks? So banks are kind of monolithic right now, right? They say they're one company that provides a bunch of different services, right? And we're starting to see sort of the atomization of all this stuff, right? So instead of going to a bank for everything, you go to Quicken Loans for this, you go to Venmo for that, you go to, whatever for, Robinhood for this, whatever. Do you see that trend continuing? I mean, is that happening in Africa and places like that, or is that something that's like a North American
Not, I mean, there are like
thing?
Venmo-like startups, and there are Venmo-like startups happening. I've seen them in um, Tanzania and Nigeria specifically, where it's like peer-to-peer payments. Mobile money, of course, is like the biggest competitor to banking. The telecoms operate that. But in terms of diversification of bank products, you don't see that much because uh, the core population that uses banking are middle class and up. Most of these people are very poor, so they're either unbanked or if they really need money, they'll go to a microfinance institution and get a loan.
Mhm.
Those are kind of the financial opportunities available to them.
Right. So, but do you think so? Pivoting to the first world, are you seeing that happening here and in other places where, I mean, the banks losing their monopoly over having customers that do everything with them?
I think people are definitely going to challenger banks and like signing up quickly for online services because a lot of people are, especially like millennial generation, don't want to have to go to a banker to like do stuff, you know? So
Yeah, yeah.
that was actually a
I
big
don't
push.
want. I don't want to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
I prefer talking.
Like you don't want to wait in line for the teller to cash a check. Like it's terrible. Like once banks started offering, the mobile cash checking or bank check cashing, it's been a game changer. And so I think a lot of these banks are realizing they have to be less in person and more online. But I think the bigger banks are are slower to adapt to that culture versus like the new startup-y challenger banks who can just basically
Right.
launch and offer great interest rates, and you just contact their customer support if you need anything. And so like I personally use a challenger bank. I also uh, was very, very unhappy with. I don't want to name names, but there's a bank I used for my first startup that required every time I sent money to Uganda, I had to go in person, and it would take like 30 minutes to an hour because the teller didn't know where Uganda was and had to do all these checks, and it was
Wow.
really awful. And it was an awful experience.
Yeah.
And so, now you have companies like TransferWise coming up where you can send, now US dollar to Uganda shilling for
Hmm.
very low, and then offering online banking as part of that. And that's just been a game changer. So
Right.
banks are going to be competing with these more innovative, more nimble startups in that sense.
Hmm. Hmm. So let's pivot to startups in general, because a lot of my listeners are startup founders. So I guess one of the things we talked about last time we talked was that you've got a lot of experience pitching your startup.
Mhm.
Have any like any horror stories and good and bad stories of what's happened when you've been pitching things, and maybe things that people can watch out for, so that when they do pitch their startups, the best way to do it and stuff like that?
Sure.
Love to hear.
Um, So you get a lot of advice when you're pitching. Like
I
everybody,
bet.
yeah, everybody wants to tell you how it should be done, or you should do it this way, that way, blah blah blah. I think the key is to know which advice is not going to work for you and to use
Hmm.
the one that will. And that requires some skill, because sometimes you just want to listen to everyone and try to do everything, but it won't work for a pitch.
Right.
What I found personally, and this may not be true for other startup founders, but I didn't like the advice, tell your own story, because some of these companies are not that personally driven. Um,
Hmm.
it's not like, oh, I never had electricity, and so I was bothered by that problem myself, and now I feel like I need to work on it. Like, that's not true.
Like kind of
I
like kind of
actually
like the TED Talk pitch, right? It's like, oh, my life is so horrible, but I solved my problem, and here's what I did.
Exactly. And I don't think that's going to work for a lot of businesses. And a lot of people
Right.
push that narrative on. And that didn't work for me because I was working with users that I am not African. I grew up in the United States, and I'm not intimate with the problem, but I spent time in these countries and I got to understand the problem. And I, because personally I cared about climate change and ecosystems, that's
Mhm.
why I started it. But starting a pitch that way isn't, I think, that compelling to an investor personally.
Right. Right.
I think investors want to hear very quickly, what is your market? What problem in like a sentence? What is your market? And then go into solution. That's
Yeah.
really what
Yeah.
they want to hear. So I've seen pitches where people spend like 3 minutes talking about why they're doing this.
Mhm.
No, those are
Yeah.
terrible pitches. so, so
Well,
that's
that kind
like
of reminds me. That kind of reminds me of Homejoy. So you remember Homejoy?
yeah,
And
I know.
and they failed, right? So I
Mhm.
remember reading about how the founder had his problem, and he founded Homejoy based on this problem that he had. But then you hear, I mean, they failed because they didn't have enough demand. So they obviously, just because the founder has a problem and the founder solves the problem doesn't necessarily mean that it's an actually a viable business, right? So I think that's the thing that investors are looking for. Like, okay, great that this is what triggered you to start this startup and made you go do this, but it's still like that has nothing to do whether it's viable, and that's nothing to do with whether investors want to sort of like pitch in. So
Yeah,
like those things are relevant to investors. They don't care, right?
yeah. No, they
Yeah.
don't care. They don't care who
Yeah,
you
let's be
are.
brutally honest. Come on, they don't care.
Yeah, they really don't care. Like they talk about team a lot when they make investments, but it's not so much about like why you are right to solve this problem. It's more about, why are you somebody who can start and build successful businesses? That's really what
Right.
they're looking for.
Right.
And you take Jack Dorsey, for example. Twitter and
Hmm.
Square are like completely different companies. Like
Hmm.
you would think that somebody would, very two different profiles would build those companies, right? but that's
Yeah.
not why. That's the thing. Like successful entrepreneurs can be given this, this problem and
Mm.
can go and build a business around it. And that's what investors are looking for.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
for me, when I did my first startup in clean energy, and then my second one was in fintech, which was different, it wasn't about, uh, how I have all this experience and this and that and that. It was more about I built this clean tech company and now I want to build this fintech company and this is how I can do it and this is how we can
Mm.
scale. That's what
Yeah.
they're really looking for. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of
Yeah.
founders miss the mark on telling that piece.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like what happened if you like Jack Dorsey is a really good example because Twitter is actually a pivot, right? I mean, it was originally Audio, which was a podcasting company, and they pivoted to become Twitter. And he added Square as another business, and it's the same with Stuart Butterfield, who did Flickr, right? Flickr was supposed to be a gaming company. They pivoted to be Flickr, and then he's launched Slack. So I mean, Slack is a great example of a founder, and he's still trying to get that gaming company off the ground. I think is the last I heard. Like the original concept, like when can I do this? But yeah, I mean, it's the track record, right? Obviously, it's a track record. I mean, and it doesn't necessarily need to be the same business. I mean, Flickr and Slack are completely different, right? I mean, Twitter and Square are completely different, like you say. It's the ability to execute on that. So, on that note, I mean, someone who's already had a bunch of businesses, whether they've failed or succeeded, has a track record. But what if you don't have a track record? What if this is your first startup and maybe you were working at a corporate for 20 years, but this idea has been stuck in the back of your head and you've wanted to do it, and now you're finally doing it because it's coronavirus related or something, I don't know, whatever it is. There's some reason why you've decided now's the time, and you're building your team. How do you start that off? How do you work without pointing to a past success or failure and going, I'm the right person for this?
Yeah, so with my first one I can point to is I worked on it on the side for 2 years before going into full time. And so I didn't like have a pitch deck and go to investors with in the beginning. I wanted to see myself like, will this work? That's what
Hmm.
I wanted to know myself because I think a lot of people think about like why investors should be interested, but not enough people think about the founder's time and what if and whether they feel that this is worth pursuing because the founder is going to be working on this more than anybody else. And you're talking about like, 60, 80-hour weeks for like a couple
Right.
years.
Yep.
The founder themselves really needs to believe in this business. And
Hmm.
when you have an idea, a founder doesn't necessarily want to put all their eggs into it. They want to test it. So that's how I felt about my adventure. When I was working in Uganda and I saw this problem that local entrepreneurs there didn't have access to finances and mentorship to build their businesses in clean energy. That problem drove me nuts. And I had an idea for a solution, but I knew I needed to test it. So actually what I did is I ran a crowdfund.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I
That's a
really
good
raised
idea, actually.
$2,000. Huh?
Yeah, that's a great
Yeah.
idea. I've heard that with, in fact, not even big companies are doing it right now, right? I mean, I think Gillette did it. I think they went to Kickstarter or whatever, and they threw something on there, and like, wow. I mean, it's like, why not? I mean, crowdfunding is a beautiful example of testing demand, right? So go on. I didn't want to interrupt your story.
Exactly. No, thank you. For this, I had a very good reason why people would give money, which was let's help Ugandans get access to electricity, which is tugs at the heartstrings. So
Mm.
I only raised $2,000 for it, and I did a pilot in Uganda while I was living in the U.S. and basically sent that money to an entrepreneur there to help them grow their energy business, and then I would do phone calls with them and WhatsApp, but like on a nightly basis until they were successful. And that was the goal: was if I
Nice.
gave a loan and I gave my time and mentorship to this entrepreneur, would they be able to grow their business? And then when they were ready to repay the loan, they said, there's another entrepreneur in our community who could also use this loan, and they're also building a clean energy business. And I thought, yeah, let's do it. I didn't know anything about this entrepreneur, but this one I was working with was backing them. So I was like, sure, let's do social trust, let's do it.
Right.
So
Yeah.
they gave them the loan that they were supposed to pay me, and then they sent me like receipts and things to prove that they sent them the money. And then the exact same thing happened, and I would get on the phone with that entrepreneur, and they were building their business, and they were using that money to buy solar products, and then it just kept growing. And then that
Mhm.
entrepreneur said, I have another friend who has an energy business. This happened
Nice.
7 times,
Oh,
7 times with one loan in
mhm.
a 2-year period. And I thought, okay, there's clearly something here. If $2,000 can revolve 7 times in 2 years, imagine what $100,000 would do,
Right. Right. Yeah.
or a
Makes
million
total sense.
dollars, or. So I got very excited, and then that's when I realized myself that this was something worth investing time into. Was when, and then I had data from the 7 entrepreneurs who used that
Right.
loan, and then when I went to find the money, I used that data to show, like, look, this works. Like, I told that story, and then I was able to get money. So Unilever invested in the idea, basically the
Mhm.
pilot, to scale it
Nice.
up from 7 entrepreneurs to 50. That was the goal.
Mhm.
And so that's how I started. And so I think that's what I like to tell other entrepreneurs who don't have a track record is, if you can do small pilots and test your idea and show that there's demand or that it works, and then use that evidence to get funding, then you can do it. But if you just come with an idea, it's very hard to get funded.
Oh,
You
yeah.
really
Yeah.
need to show you really need to show that that work has been done, even on a small scale. And you can raise like 2,000, 5,000, just use your own money, use your family's money to just prove that out.
Yeah.
Then you can raise the money you actually need.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of, so it's like the MVP, right? But the difference, I think a lot of people think that they have to really have the thing working
Yeah,
before it actually, they launch it. But the reality is that you don't necessarily need to do that. You can just come up with a fake version of it, and
yeah,
just as sense demand. I mean, I think this happened with Aardvark. I don't know if you've heard of Aardvark, but it was this like Q&A type service. It was almost like Quora, but it was live chat. And what would happen, and I knew somebody who worked there, and they were bought by Google, by the way. And basically the way they started was that he wanted to set up a service where people would ask questions and other people would answer them, right? And it would be like they would create an app where I would ask a question that would match you up with somebody else who would answer the question. And that was the app that they wanted to build. But to test to see if this worked, they basically just set up a website which collected questions, and then they would answer it on the back end. And they're the ones who were like fake answering the questions like they were from other people. So they were trying to sort of prove the model just by using off the shelf tools like WordPress or whatever. And I think that's what a lot of entrepreneurs thinking, oh, I have to go all the way and I have to spend 25,000 to build this app, and I have to build this and I have to build this, I build this. But you can test all of these in a very small way using free off the shelf tools just to see what happens. Or you can go the route
yeah,
of Kickstarter or crowdfund it and say, well, if there's enough interest to actually get to the crowdfunding, then there's probably more interest. So in your case, it was like you do a small version of it, or a minimal model of it, see if it works, and then there's your data to prove that it actually works at this level, and then all you need to do is scale. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs sort of they want to get there first before they actually test it. And I think that the testing in the marketplace and getting that response is super key. I mean, if you don't do that, then how is anybody going to look at you and go, yeah, this is going to be a great idea, right?
yeah.
So it sounds like you did a lot of manual work. Is that true? Like there was a lot of manual work on the back end, and you weren't actually building an app. You were building a business, right? So you weren't building okay. So so when you scaled, did you just add more people, or how did you where did you go when you
Yeah,
started scaling?
add people. That was key for me because that was like the first thing I did when I got my first check. Was I need to hire like a deputy basically in
Right.
Uganda. And so uh I did not have co-founders. I knew that I had to build a really strong management team to start. and then
Mm-hmm.
filling in key roles as we continue to grow. So I invested a lot of time personally in team building.
Mm-hmm.
And especially because I was living in the United States and not in Uganda, I knew I needed a team that could do the day to day without me because I couldn't do the day to day work. So all those phone calls I
Right.
was doing at night with the entrepreneurs was going to be their job. So I had to
Right.
like teach them how to do this. And so when I was building it, like I was actually very internally focused. I mean, of course, I had like the funder relationships to deal with, but I wasn't looking to, I was really focused internally and not externally because I wanted to really build a rock solid team, and that was key
Mm-hmm.
for me.
Right.
And 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 I was just really fortunate to find really really awesome people there who just loved what we were doing, our mission, and quit banking jobs to join, and which is actually a big deal in Uganda because that's like a
That's huge.
yeah.
That is huge thumbs up for your business when you get bank executives who like leaving banks and coming to what you're doing. So that's great. That's
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it was really validating and awesome for me to see that. And so, yeah, and they were just so passionate about it. And that's really what I realized is what made that team so strong was their passion and conviction for the problem you're trying to solve and our
Mm-hmm.
solution versus people who are just looking for a job. And I think that's really
Excellent.
important in the beginning
Yeah.
stages. Is you want people who really believe in what you're doing versus like, I want to join a startup
Mm-hmm.
because that's where you'll find the hardest working people. And
Right.
so within 2 years, I'd say the team was pretty fully functional without me involved in the day to day.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
I started being more external in terms of the
And
work.
so you had, it sounds like you grew organically through referrals, right? I mean, when did you decide, or maybe you never did decide, to sort of expand into some kind of sales operation? Because did you go beyond the referrals, or is it all referral business?
Oh, the entrepreneurs we were funding? Or are you
Yeah.
talking about? Yeah. No. So in the beginning, it was referrals,
Mhm.
because that was easy to do, and I didn't have like a system in place to find entrepreneurs. So once the team was in place, we had a system. So we
Okay.
created an application process and a loan due diligence process. It's definitely not as easy now
Mhm.
for an entrepreneur to get a loan from us as it was a few years ago.
Right.
Now they have to like go through the work of in showing our team that they can repay the loan. So
Right.
so there is a sales process involved. The entrepreneurs, there's more demand than we can supply right now.
Mhm.
Demand for business loans essentially is extremely high,
Right.
and we were offering low interest rates. So your
Mhm.
12%, that's what we were doing, 12 to 16%, which is
Yeah.
incredibly uh, attractive in Uganda. So, and for us, it wasn't about making money on the interest of the loans. It was more about because then you start turning to predatory models. For
Yeah.
us, it was more about building add-on services that we could then charge.
Mhm. So that was your successful startup, right?
Hmm.
Okay. And you said you also had one that didn't go so well.
Yeah,
Could
that was the fintech one.
you can talk a little bit about that and maybe give us an overview of what you think went wrong and what you might have done differently?
Yeah,
Yep.
so this was actually started as a kind of a project of adventure. My first startup was, we had this time consuming loan due diligence process. And I felt, if these entrepreneurs just were using like a QuickBooks like app that was catered for their for their persona, then we could leverage that data and it'd be so much faster for us to make decisions. So
Mhm.
that was to solve a problem that we had as a lender. And then I talked to other lenders and they all were like, yes, this would be a great problem. This is a problem for us and be a great solution for us. But I think, just maybe we talked about this last time, but like you getting interest from potential customers is always there. Getting willingness to pay is a different story. So yeah, all these banking clients that at first were like, yeah, we would love this, like, and I talked a little bit earlier about how banks are incredibly risk averse. I didn't like, because they talk very differently when you have conversations with them. They're like very interested in fintech. They're really excited about new innovations. They want to test everything. So it's like it came to me like, oh man, this could be a really big business. Like let's
Hmm.
create a QuickBooks for Africa and like sell the data to lenders. Like boom, like
Yeah.
huge
Yeah.
market. And that's what I got really excited by
They're
that.
leading you on. They're leading you on, these guys. No, I was kidding.
I got really excited by that. And I thought, wow, like, I think I got too in love with like the market size and the problem, but didn't focus enough on the solution. And so I did build an MVP as an app. And I did what you said. I spent like 25,000 building this app that I think it's a good app, but I think the businesses I wanted to use this app were still not convinced themselves that they needed an app like this to manage their business. And I thought that they would be excited about it because it would mean they don't longer have to do pen and paper bookkeeping. But then I didn't understand that that actually wasn't that big of a pain point for them as I had thought.
Mm,
And a lot of them, they work on a cash in, cash out kind of day by day basis. So like projections and financials and all these cool things the app could do for them wasn't actually that
they
interesting.
didn't really, they didn't really care about it.
Yeah, they don't really think about it. So
What was your business
very
model? What was the monetization model? I mean, how were you selling the app, or were you selling access to the app, or how were you
no,
monetizing?
I was selling the data to lenders.
Oh,
So
okay.
the
So
projections and all those things are incredibly interesting to lenders, but they're not interesting to the users. So that was
right.
a problem. Is I would do a pilot with a bank, and they would actually introduce it to some of their lendees borrowers,
Hmm.
and the usage would just not be there. And
Right.
so that's when I realized, oh man, we built an MVP for what we thought a customer would be. We didn't build an MVP for a user,
Right.
uh,
Right.
which is hard when you're doing like a B2B2C type business model,
Yeah.
because you have to kind of satisfy both ends, and we were too focused on the monetization end and not enough on just like getting users to use it end. So
Right.
and we knew that we had to work on this piece, but at the same time, we'd had very little runway, and I thought, if I could just get investors interested in this B2B side and just focus on signing like awesome pilots. Like we did one with Unilever, we did one with World Vision. So like it looked great, on
Hmm.
paper. And I thought, that would be enough. And then we got the money, then we can like figure out how to get the users interested. And I think that obviously didn't work because the investors wanted to see the users too.
Right.
and so like just signing up the customer to show that we could potentially win contracts wasn't enough to
Right.
close a round. And by the end, when we really realized, okay, we need to scrap what we've done and like really focus on the user and build something they would use and
Hmm.
ignore the kind of the B2B side, it was too late. And we were out of money. And I personally felt like this was too hard of a business. Like it
Right.
shouldn't be this hard if you
There are
want,
easier things.
yeah, well, I mean, with
Yeah.
in venture, my loan cycled to 7 entrepreneurs within 2 years with me doing very little work. Here,
Hmm.
I was doing so much work and couldn't get users, and
Yeah.
it became really it no longer was fun. And
Yeah.
when you're
Yeah.
a founder, you want to like wake up excited to do what you're working on. And towards
Yeah.
the end of last year, I was like really unhappy to work on
Yeah.
vision. And so I realized, what, this is still a huge problem. And I'm sure another entrepreneur will figure this out and have this $1 billion business that I couldn't make. But my mental health is important too. So
Yes.
let
Absolutely.
that person figure
Absolutely.
it out.
That's a really interesting, because there's so many differences between those two models, because it's kind of like with the model that failed, you were trying to build something. You're trying to build an app which basically did a lot of your legwork for you, but the underlying business is sound, right? It really is sound, because the first thing you were doing was working, right? You were making money, you were making loans, everything was just crunching along. It's like as soon as you started thinking about, well, maybe we can automate some of this stuff, that's when everything started falling apart. And it's really interesting that I think that's probably what a lot of startup founders are thinking. They're thinking, oh, if we could just automate this, then I don't have to do any work and money will just flow in. But I think the reality is that you have to make sure that whatever you're doing works, even if you have to do it manually. And then whatever you're doing works, then you have to sort of really selectively decide which elements you can replace with automation before you can say, this is because I'm sure that if you're looking back on it now, you're probably saying, well, if instead of doing this, we would have done this or this or this, or like these automated other elements that maybe saved a little money here and there, it would have continued to be more successful instead of like going for, like you said, you were talking to the banks. The banks were your customers, not your customers. Your customers had to use it, but if they weren't using it and there was no compelling reason for them to use it, so
Mhm.
that's why it fell apart. But did you do any market research with your actual customers, like your end users, and they said
I
it was good, or they said we don't need this, or what did they say?
No, they were very similarly like, oh, this is great. Like, this seems like it would solve all my problems. Like, I got a lot of maybe that was part of the problem is I don't have a like I'm not a skilled UX researcher, and maybe I needed somebody to do that because
Right.
the responses I was getting was motivating me, and I don't think people are very truthful when you talk to them face to face about something you're working on.
Hmm.
People want to be encouraging.
Yeah.
So, when I'm talking to, small businesses and like, would they use this? They would tell me their problems. They would tell me their why they like the app, but they wouldn't tell me what they didn't like about it. And I kept pressing
Right.
them, what did you not like about it? Like what, and like I couldn't get that response. And that was, so then I just kind of was like, okay, I guess it'll work then. And I don't think I was able to drill down to like what they didn't like about it effectively. And I think also just this, a lot of assumptions I had too, because I know inventory is such a huge issue small businesses deal with because they don't track it well. They don't know how much they're spending on it. They misplace things all the time. So I thought, this would be a great piece for the app. Start
Hmm.
with inventory, and then, as they build out their inventory, then they can start making sales and then include that data into the app. And what I realized after we launched was that was actually the thing people were least interested in. They
Oh,
were
really?
more interested in their sales. Yeah.
Mhm.
But because we had people enter their inventory first, there'd be a massive drop off because nobody really wanted to go through the work of counting their inventory. And
Exactly.
even
Totally.
though they should, uh, they didn't want to do that. And so that was a insight I did not get when I did my research, and I wish I had, because I probably would have designed the app very differently, and maybe it would be different now where I'd be
Yeah.
with it. But well, that's in
Well,
the
yeah.
past.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of elements there, right? I mean, you're right. I mean, in that people are not, a lot of times they're not truthful when they're talking to you. Not because they really want to be untruthful. It's just because they want to, like you said, they want to encourage you. They want to, they think, like, based on what they've seen, they think it's going to help them, right? And a lot of times, I mean, we talked about this before with like Dan O'Reilly's book Predictably Irrational, where people will put responses down they don't necessarily believe in, just to get a good result at the end, right? So they feel that's going to be a better result. But have you hello, are you still there?
Uh-oh, you cut
can
out.
you, can you hear me?
Chris?
Yes. Are you there? I think I lost my video.
Hello?
I can hear you. Oh no. Hello. Hello. I guess Zoom is having trouble. Can you hear me? Hmm. Too many people using it, I guess. That's the problem. Hello? Hopefully we can, Aneri will be able to rejoin us. in a second. Hello? Hi,
Hi.
can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I can hear you. You cut out when you started talking about Riley's book.
Too many Zooms going on at once, I think. That's the problem. Oh, are you still there?
Yeah,
Hello? Okay.
exactly. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear me
Okay.
now? All
Yes.
right. Okay, cool. I forget where I was now. Yeah, so
You
people
were Tina
people
Riley.
will yeah, so people will just make stuff up. Like when you give them a survey, they'll just make stuff up. So a lot of times you can't trust everything that they're giving you. But at the same time, I mean, you still need to get that consumer feedback. So it's really difficult to do it in such a way where you're getting realistic consumer feedback. And I think that the key there is that you have to go to people who don't know you at all, don't know anything about you, are not connected with you, and just sort of disconnect yourself from them so they can get real objective responses, right? And that's hard to do because your initial set of customers were people that you knew. Are you still there? I think I lost you. Are you still
I'm
there?
here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Did you did you miss
Okay,
all of that?
you were kind of slow, choppy.
Am I still choppy? Oh
No, now
man.
you're okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So would you have gone to, I don't know if you caught what I was saying, but if you go to more objective customers, like people who are more disconnected from you, do you think that would have worked out better?
Probably. And yeah, that's probably a good point. We should have done that. We actually did try a little bit, but a lot of it was actually kind of hard to get people we didn't know to talk to us. They were like, I'm running my shop, like I'm busy, like I don't have
Yeah,
time
leave
to
me
talk to
alone.
you. And sometimes they'd be like, oh, we had to give you like $5 for your time, and I'm like, well, my boss is coming back, so there's a lot of like logistical issues, but we probably could have worked on that harder. I think we just got
Yeah,
intimidated.
and
but
that's a really tough
but
market.
we
The small mom and pop retailers. It's a really really tough market to get into because they're all so
yeah.
busy, right? I mean, they're totally swamped. And I think another piece of it is human nature too, right? Because a lot of people, they want stuff done for them, and if you give them anything that requires them to do more work, it's really difficult to get them to do that. And not just small businesses, it's like anybody. You have to, and that's what I think about. There's been situations where I'm in meetings where people are coming up with ideas, and they're like, "Well, the customer should do this, or the customer should do that," and the customer, it's like, "No, the
Yeah.
customer can't do any more. The customer is already doing enough. It's time to take stuff off their plate as opposed to putting that on their plate. So if you can take things off people's plates and give them less work to do, then you're on the way. I mean, I think that's what was happening with your other business. It was successful, right? I mean, you were helping them get loans. I mean, they didn't have to go through the legwork that you were going through for them. So I think a good lesson there is that you have to make sure that your customers do less work, right? I mean, if your customers are doing less work, I mean, it plays to human nature. Human nature, people don't want to do more work. They want to do less work. And if you can get them to do less work, if you can take it off their plates, then that's always a good thing.
Yeah, I think also I that that whole adoption curve kind of threw me in the wrong direction, to be honest, and probably a lot of founders, because I was thinking, oh well, if that person's probably just a late adopter, like that's why
Mhm.
they're not agreeing to it. Like, and I
Yeah,
think probably a lot of founders think, oh, like if I could just figure out who the early adopters are or the innovators who would be interested in my product, then I can worry about those people later. The problem is I found it really hard to figure out who my early adopters were. Like we tried really hard, and I thought, let's just get the app out there, and whoever downloads the app is obviously an early adopter. Like that was my thinking. So even though, like what you said, was going after these, uh, trying to make these people do less work. But I was thinking, like early adopters are willing to work with crappy products. And, that's what we're told by Silicon Valley, that,
yeah,
like early adopters are happy to work with MVPs. And,
yeah,
and,
yeah,
um, and I, I'm not saying the early adopters are a myth. I just think that there's too much emphasis placed on them. And I
yeah,
think to build a really scalable business, I think you do kind of have to start thinking about late adopters from the beginning and how you would acquire
yeah.
them.
Yeah.
because you can't survive on early adopters alone. And I think we're too focused on finding those people versus, satisfying a minimum viable problem that these customers have, and just like solving that pain point, and getting them to, and it doesn't have to be, um, you know, it doesn't have to be somebody who is super tech savvy and just like wants to try a bunch of things. So I, yeah, just wanted to add that piece.
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting you should mention that, because it's a lot of startup founders that think that this sort of innovative new idea is the way to go, like this cool new innovative idea, and that's why I think that's one of the reasons why you need early adopters, because they're also into the cool new innovative
Yeah.
idea. But those first movers, a lot of times, they're not the most profitable businesses. They're not the best businesses. It's the second and third, fourth movers who've perfected whatever the first ones did. I mean, look at Facebook and MySpace, Google and Yahoo. They moved up. They're fast followers. They came along and said, I'm going to do this better. And if you think about it, they actually leverage off the first people in the space, because the first people in the space have already sort of plowed the fields and gotten people ready for this other way of doing things, which may actually work better. So that
Although
the fast followers
I,
are the ones who are more profitable.
mhm.
I don't know if you caught any of that.
You broke up a little bit, but I think I
You were
understood.
cutting out. Anyways, we're
Maybe
almost
this
at
last
the end of the
part of
hour.
the
So
interview, I don't know if it will
tell us
make
a little,
it, but
so tell us a little bit of what you're doing now and how you could. So, are you helping other startup founders now, or what are you doing nowadays?
yeah, I'm looking for new opportunities in the tech startup ecosystem. Since I have so much experience as a 2 Chainz founder, that I can leverage that experience in supporting other founders, especially mission driven ones. Um, so yeah, I'm looking for opportunities in that space. I'm noodling on an idea for another startup, but won't be a startup. It'll be more like my idea the first time I test it, very small, pilot it. I could probably pilot it with very little money, so I don't even
Mhm.
need to crowdfund for it. But that's what I really realized from my second startup was, if you have a new idea, just don't even think about it as a startup. Think about it as a project, a pilot.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then once you're convinced that this project pilot has teeth, then you can start thinking about it as a startup.
Yeah,
So
no, that's
that's
a
a
good way of thinking
lesson.
about it. That's a good way of thinking about it. Yeah, if it has teeth, I like that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, anything else you want to let the listeners know, or are we good?
um, we're good. If anyone wants to contact me, maybe Chrissy can give them my email.
Yeah, no, I'll add it to the. We can connect to you on LinkedIn and all that good stuff if anybody wants to contact you and get some assistance. So you're also you're also helping startups with their pitches too, right? I mean, it's not just you doing your own stuff, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I definitely advised startups before. I went through an accelerator last year, and sometimes I get called back to help startups in their on their portfolio. I find this especially with more like sciencey technical founders. I have a really hard time pitching, so I'm good at like
yeah,
helping those types to figure out how to very neatly explain what they do in 3 minutes. So that's
nice.
some skills I have.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know if I told you this last time, but there's a guy who I knew how to start up. It took him 30 minutes to explain his business. It's like ridiculous. I mean, if you
I
if
can
you
help him.
if it takes 30 minutes, then I don't know if it's viable or not. So
Yeah.
awesome. Well, it was great talking with you. It was like a lot of fun. And sorry about the technical glitches, but with everything going on, I'm sure Zoom is overloaded. So it was great talking with you.
Yeah, great
Thank you.
speaking with
Thank you
you,
so much.
Chris. Thank you. Thank you
Thank you
for
so much.
the fun conversation.
Oh no, we're losing it again. Oh no. Hey, I'll let you know. So I'll edit it up and I'll set it up and I'll let you know when it's ready so you can share it amongst your followers and everything.
Oh,
So
perfect. Thank you. Yeah, I was
thank you
gonna
so
say this
much.
probably needs to be edited.
Yeah, I'll take a few bits of it out. Don't worry about it. Or I could just leave it
Yeah.
as is. Who knows? I mean, it's like, this is like the coronavirus special, right? I mean, this is what you get
Yeah.
in the time
Yeah.
of low bandwidth. Anyways, thank you so much.